You opened your eyes to life on a misty and humid morning in the year 1347 in one of Europe's port cities, in a wooden shack. You started the game not just on hardest mode, but practically on impossible mode. There were no modern hospitals or sterile rooms around you, only the sound of horse carriages coming from outside and the never-ending smell of manure. Your family prayed to God every day for you to survive, because in that period, a baby reaching 1-year-old was almost impossible. In other words, if I were to describe the difficulty in today's terms, it was as hard as OnlyFans models' fathers being proud of them. When you turned 5 years old, you thought you would spend your childhood running around the neighborhood kicking a ball, didn't you? You were wrong. Your toys were wooden sticks and the rats running in the streets. People at that time believed that diseases spread because of bad air. Your mother would hang foul-smelling herbs around your neck to protect you from the stench outside. You would hear witch-like healers telling you, "Don't wash yourself. If you open your pores, the disease will enter." Yes, in the Middle Ages, cleanliness was not considered a luxury, but a danger. So, as you can understand, the healthcare system was pretty much on the level of Indian street food. When you turned 10 years old, those famous ships docked at the port. On the ships, there wasn't just silk and spices, there were also fleas carrying the greatest killer in history, the Yersinia pestis bacterium. In the first days, no one understood what was happening. Within a few weeks, the neighbors began turning into tombstones one by one. The streets were overflowing with corpses. People were loading the bodies onto carts and taking them to mass graves, while others were left to rot inside their homes. Those who saw the purple swellings, appearing in their groins and armpits, were horrified and ripped themselves while begging God for forgiveness. You, on the other hand, were watching outside from the window in fear. In that period, people thought this was a kind of divine punishment system. The fleas were practically God's messengers, and in reality, they were spreading the disease with their own hands. As the disease grew, atonement rituals were held, and these rituals turned into crowded ceremonies, mass prayers, and mass processions. The more the crowds increased, the more easily the fleas spread. When you turned 15, you were already considered an adult. If we were in the Middle Ages, we would call you a knight. You witnessed that 4 out of every 10 people around you died, and in some cities, even more than half. Out of desperation, people were slaughtering cats and dogs, calling them friends of the devil, which caused the rats to multiply even more. You were working as an apprentice next to a baker, but instead of bread, you were mostly carrying corpses. That heavy smell in the city and the constantly ringing church bells had turned into your paranoia. When you turned 25, those famous terrifying plague doctors appeared before you. They were wearing long beaks, leather gloves, and a horrifying cloak. Inside their beaks were fragrant herbs, lavender and vinegar, so they wouldn't smell the odor of death. The worst part was that the doctors really didn't know anything. They suggested treatments like rub a frog on your body, drink vinegar, or tie a live chicken. The most brutal one was that, thinking they were removing dirty blood, they would bleed you from your arm and weaken you even more. Some doctors would put snake pieces or onion poultice on the swellings. Just like an agent changing identity, you decided to flee the city and take refuge in the countryside. But the disease found you there too. The people in the countryside saw strangers as disease carriers and stoned them, so you were a danger to them. The silent villages you left behind while fleeing, the houses with open doors and the never-stopping sound of bells never left your mind. If you managed to stay alive until the age of 40, that meant you had reached the nirvana level of that era, because the Black Death had wiped out approximately 30 to 50% of Europe's population. In some regions, this rate went up to 60 to 80%. The average life expectancy was already very low, but for survivors like you, things had changed a bit. The young population had decreased dramatically, and the feudal system had begun to collapse. The value of the surviving workers had increased, and wages had risen. Now you could eat more meat and find better bread. But here's the thing, this time money wasn't bringing happiness. Your soul had already been wounded. Every night when you laid your head on the pillow, you thought about the siblings you lost, your mother, your father, and those silent corpse-smelling streets. If I were in such a situation, believe me, I would want to die. More precisely, I would want to die and be freed from it. You took your last breath on a winter night when the plague had already lost its effect, but your body had grown exhausted. Not even a stone was placed on your grave. You lived like a ghost and left just like that. The dusty pages of history are filled with millions of Black Death victims like you, whose names are unknown. If you want darker details from this period or other, what if you were born scenarios, for example, a Viking warrior or a modern cult member, you can indicate it in the comments. Well then, see you in another What If.